Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Robert Swartwood. I am here tonight, or today, really, depending on where you are, with the USA Today bestselling author, Christina McDonald. She's also the Amazon Charts bestselling author of 4 novels: These Still Black Waters, her recent release, Do No Harm, which I have a copy here. And then also, actually, I think I have both your other books too, but they're on Kindle, Behind Every Lie and The Night Olivia Fell, which has been optioned for television by a major Hollywood studio. Originally from Seattle, Washington, she now
That's right.
lives in London with her husband, 2 sons, and their dog Tango. So, Christina, thank you for
Hi,
joining us.
nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So we were chatting in the green room earlier. Obviously, we want to talk about your new book, which just recently came out. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But before we start, kind of just give us the in your bio, it talked about how you wanted to be a writer since you were a little girl.
Yeah.
So some people kind of come into it just on a whim. Sometimes they're just like, oh, who was there an interview I read recently, or maybe I was at BoucherCon, and it was some like best-selling author where basically it was it was Brad Thor. Brad Thor wanted to be a writer, but then he stopped. And then at one point, I guess he said he got married, or he recently got married, and his his newlywed wife
Yeah.
was basically like, when you're old or something, was the one thing you'll regret never doing. And he was just like, writing and publishing a book. And she was like, well, then that's what you're going to do. And then
Right.
now
Yeah.
he's obviously one of the biggest. But for you wanted to be a writer from like the very beginning, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I've always wanted to be a writer, but I never thought that it was a practical dream. Do you know what I mean? Like, I always thought I would have to get a real job. Even as a kid, I thought I'd need a real job. It seemed because I was a massive bookworm growing up. I was always around books. I was always begging my mom to take me to the library. I didn't grow up with a lot of money, so we didn't buy books. We had to go to the library, and I would have lived in the library if I could. But writing those books just seemed completely just like fanciful, so I got a real job. I grew up and became a journalist and went about it in like a roundabout way, but I've always been a writer, and I've always told stories. And as a child, I told stories to my sisters, and then as I got older, I did journalism, and I told real stories, like not fake stories. You're not allowed to do that in journalism. So I told those real stories. And then I got into copywriting, like digital copywriting. So I worked for different brands like Expedia and a number of UK brands, particularly travel brands, telling stories in terms of travel and how to get somebody to the end of that journey. That it's called a user journey, and you get them to click that button at the end of that journey. So that's how I've just always told stories, but I didn't really think I could do it as an author until I had a baby, and I was like, I'm going to write in my spare time, which wasn't very often, but when the baby sleeps, instead of me sleeping, I would write. And it took many, many years and many, many manuscripts. I didn't publish my first manuscript, but I just kind of started and kept at it. And it's just kind of one of those things where it's drops in the ocean, right? Like all those words eventually build up, and eventually you have a book. No matter how bad it is, it's a book, and you can kind of edit it from there. But it's always been inside of me and something I've wanted to do for sure. Yeah.
So the first book, correct me if I'm wrong, was the Olivia book.
Yeah. The Night Olivia Fell.
The
Yeah.
Night Olivia Fell. Was that your, okay, so that's your first published novel, but was that the first novel you actually wrote?
No, I wrote lots of books before that. Oh man, I went on submission. I submitted my previous, but 2 books before that, to almost 100 agents, 100. And then in the middle of that process, I moved from America. We moved back to London, and continued then trying to get agents here in the UK. So I've submitted to agents in the US and in the UK, and like none of them were optioning the book. They didn't like take the book on. And then I wrote another one, and then that one did get taken on, and I did get an agent, and then it went out to publishers, but it didn't sell. So that's something that I didn't really realize could happen. I just thought once you get an agent, you're golden. Like it'll obviously sell, but that's not the case. Like they're just there to help sell it, but sometimes they don't. So then I had to go back to the drawing board and write another book, and that one didn't sell, and then write another book, and that one was like my fourth one. That was The Night Olivia Fell. So I mean, I don't know if there are any authors I know of who just sat down and wrote a book that miraculously sold and became a bestseller, and that was their first one. I don't know. Did you?
So no, I mean,
No.
I got my first agent out of college. And when I say my first
Yeah.
agent, because often a lot of times writers, it always amazes me when writers basically have one agent their entire career,
Yeah, me
which is
too.
great. But, sometimes it's, oftentimes it's for whatever reason.
Yeah,
I mean,
change.
it's just like relationships. It's just, eventually you just kind of feel like it's not a good fit anymore and you
Yeah.
decide to part ways. But yeah, I had the same idea where, it had been a struggle to get an agent. And as soon as you got an agent,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, well, this is great. I'm going to sell this
Yeah,
book.
I'm golden. It's great.
And then you realize like, nope, it's not this way. And this was
It's
back
not
in the
like
day.
that.
I don't know when you were doing it, but God, I feel so old. Like literally I had to print out copies of the book.
Me
Like,
too.
they were sending,
Yeah.
either you could let them print it out themselves and they would send it to publishers. And then when they sold it, like the cost of all that would come out of your advance, or
Yeah.
you could, basically provide the copies ahead of time. And so
Yeah.
I sent like 10 copies of my manuscript to my agent, and then they sent those to the publisher. It's so crazy. I mean, nowadays, the editor or the agents just basically email,
Yeah.
which
It's
is
all
so much
email.
easier. And,
Yeah.
they basically read it on a tablet or e-reader or whatever else. Now
Yeah.
it's, but yeah, no, it took, I mean, and then, so I think that agent had shopped around, I think 2 or 3 things, and it just, there
Yeah.
wasn't any luck. I kind of, and you kind of feel like, okay, enthusiasm's not there anymore. You part ways, and I ended up getting another agent. Same thing, shopped around a couple different books. And then you also realize too, like publishing, it's so crazy where
Yeah.
it's, obviously the books have to be good, but it's also about luck, being at like the right,
So much.
finding the right editor at the right house at the right time.
But not just
Occasionally
the
you would,
editor, the whole marketing team, like
oh, that's
the
another thing too. You might
publisher,
have
everything.
an editor
Yeah.
who loves the book.
Yeah.
You might have other people at the publisher who loves the book, but ultimately the marketing team could be like, no, or they could be like, you know
Yeah.
what, we just accepted, or we're going to publish something very similar in like a couple
Yeah.
months.
Totally.
It's so yeah. Oftentimes there's a lot of really good books that just never get published. So that's
Yeah.
why, I ended up really just self-publishing a lot of my stuff, because it was around like the gold rush days of Kindle, and I had all these
Yeah.
books on my computer that I'm
Yeah.
like, I know they're not bad
What do I do
books.
with these?
And
Yeah.
yeah. So, okay. So you had published that one, and I want to talk a little, well, first of all, so, okay. So that was the fourth book you had written, your first one that you published.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
you, and I always hate using the term, but everyone does, so I might as well use it. Are you a plotter or pantser in that time? I mean, do you kind of sit down
Oh,
with an idea and just kind of start,
yeah.
let it fly? Or do you really outline ahead of time? Or do you just kind of do like maybe like a page or two outline? I mean, like, what is the
No.
process there?
I am a pure pantser. So I do have a basic idea of what I want to write about, something that is like calling to me. And I was talking about this, you might have seen me talking with Vanessa Lilly about this. When I have an idea for a story and I know it's my story and I know I need to write this book, it's like a feeling that I get. I call it the aura of the story. It's like this feeling where it really grabs me and I can't stop thinking about it. Not for just like an hour or a day, like days, I can't stop thinking about it. And I have this like real passion about that idea. And so then I just sit down to write the story, and it's based on basically either the hook or the inciting incident. So I've got kind of that framework and that's it. Sometimes it's just a scene. So with the second book to These Still Black Waters, the sequel, I wrote a scene. That was what called to me. And then I just went from there. But everything else, I don't plot. I feel like it really squashes any creativity that I have. And for a long time, I actually felt a little bit guilty because everybody says you're supposed to plot, you're supposed to plot. But what I do, and I used to do this in school as well, I write my chapter and then I put it into like outline format. so that I know what's happened in that chapter. And then at the end, when I have all my chapters, this big, massive outline, I get it out and I cut each of those plot points and I move it around like a jigsaw puzzle. I'm really visual. So it's like, I need to see it first and then I can do edits that way. So it's kind of like sculpting and ice sculpture. Like I just like put stuff up there and then I sort of sculpt it. So as you can see, all these notes, this is my very elegant editing process.
So I should also mention that Christina was actually very kind to blurb my Avery Bishop novel, One Year
Yes,
Gone.
loved it.
I am also, I guess, a pantser. I really hate using the term pantser because I think it's a stupid term. But yes, I'm the
It's
same
kind of a
thing where
word.
basically I have an idea and I just kind of sit down and I just kind of let things go. Now, for anybody who's read One Year Gone, the structure in this was one where like I didn't outline it, but I
Yeah.
just kind of did take a piece of paper and said, because basically you have 3 different timelines that are running
Yeah.
simultaneously.
Currently,
And
yeah.
so I did kind of know, like I knew where I wanted to go. So I don't say I outlined it, but I still kind of jotted down, okay, this is where it's going to be present. This is going to be the, the pep rally. And so there are some projects where I do find myself having to do that more so than normal. But yeah, like you, I'd like to just kind of, just kind of see where things go.
Yeah.
I had
I'm
written
aware
one.
that you need to have like certain things happen at certain points of the book, because I think humans are inherently storytellers and we like stories being told to us. So obviously there's something that happens at the first plot point and the midpoint and the third plot point. There needs to be like this sort of framework that we all as readers expect. So I'm aware of that in my writing, kind of where I'm at in the, like how many words am I at? I'm aware of that, but I don't write to it and I don't plot it.
It's interesting. I never, maybe subconsciously I think about it, but I never really on the surface think about like, okay, we're at page 20, something needs to happen now. It's just in my mind, it's one of those like, I don't know. It's very weird. I don't know. And that's why I love having these conversations with writers, just because every writer is different. There's no like right or wrong way.
Different. Yeah.
But obviously the way that we do is the correct way. So, okay. So this also was the book that you hit the USA Today, you hit the USA Today bestseller list with, which again is no easy feat.
Yeah.
I know how you did it because I read the article that you have done, and I hit the list twice using the same thing. I mean, essentially BookBub is a godsend. Actually, it's not as effective as it used to be, unfortunately. But can you kind of talk about how that happened? Because I think for a lot of readers, they will see that bestseller tag, and there's this, and I think a lot of writers have this idea too, where you always hear it like, oh, I need to go with the publisher because I don't want to do any marketing myself. And it's like even major best-selling authors have to do, they still have to partake in marketing. They still have to do a lot of stuff. So
you have to have some ownership.
Absolutely. So can you just kind of talk about how, because my understanding is, if I remember correctly, you really like, it was all you. I mean, the publisher, I mean, they made the book on sale, but that was kind of the extent of it. Can you talk a little bit about like that? I guess, because I mean, you made it work, but obviously it was not easy.
It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of planning, which I'm not great at. I really had to organize. I was of the mind frame that if I was going to do it, I was going to do it right. So I was going to put some of my own marketing money into it, and I was going to do it right. So I did the BookBub. I did, I think it's called Fussy Librarian. I did Book Doggy, all those sort of discounted book sites. I pitched for all of them, every one that I could. And then I did get very lucky because my publisher, Simon & Schuster, put the book into, they have like a weekly discounted deals email that goes out to like, I don't even know, tens of thousands of people. So that was hugely effective as well. So it was a team effort, but I did a lot of the organizing on the like grassroots level. And then, social media, advertising, all of that. It really helped as well that the book was so well publicized ahead of time. So when people saw that drop into their email on discount, they were like, oh, cool, I've seen this book. Because you know what they say, it takes 7 times for somebody to see an item, a product, and then to click through and buy it. It takes on average 7 times to convert that person, and potentially more for a book. So if somebody is seeing a list of all these discounted books, but it's something that they recognize, that they've seen before because it's been very well publicized, that's more likely to convert. So I was thinking these things, like I had a lot of publicity for The Night Olivia Fell. I got really lucky with that. And then I worked really hard at doing all of the, BookBub and all that, social media ads, everything. I just put everything into it. But it was off of my own back. I felt like it was a lot of work, and I mean, it was worth it. Like, I wanted that bestseller badge and I got it. Like, I went for it. But that being said, that doesn't always happen. It's not just like you can go, I want it, I'm going to get it. I tried it again with Behind Every Lie and it didn't work. So I don't know what made that one be the one that everybody bought. I'm not sure.
Well, again, it goes into that whole luck thing. I mean, and there's so much that it's also out of your control because you don't know what other books are going to be on sale that week. I remember, I think, really trying to do I had a BookBub. I really was trying to push another title. And I think I still actually sold more copies than I had of one of my titles that did hit the USA Today bestseller list.
Yeah.
But I think it was also like that week, like they decided to make like 50 Dr. Seuss titles on sale. So like, you know what I mean? So like, it was just like half of the list was just Dr. Seuss. And so there's just things that are just completely out of your control that, there's just so much you can do. At the very least, you're selling a lot of books, you're ideally growing a lot of,
new readers. So. And I think that that's part of it as well, is you have to look at like these things, none of them, it's never a loss. You're always looking at like, who's reading my book, who's going to be reading my books in the future because they read this book. So, but we all have to take ownership. As you said, like even big authors have to have some ownership over their marketing and their readership, so that's why I have my newsletter as well. It's like, I want to make sure that, because social media changes all the time, right? Like the algorithm is always changing and people drop off and whatever. But if somebody gives you their email address, that's like gold. They're like really trusting you with something to get like right into their personal sphere. And so I want to give my readers something that they can look forward to every month, not just book recommendations, not just, a free book, but something about me, something about books, the whole package. I want to provide that for them. So I am hopefully giving them something that they want as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You never know when an unhinged billionaire buys a social media company. It could just happen at any point. So yeah, everybody should sign up for Christina's newsletter. She does a lot of stuff on there, giveaways and whatever else. So your first novel was the fourth one you had written. Were the previous three also like suspense thriller, or were they different types of genres, or like from the very beginning you knew that like this was the type of genre you wanted to write in?
No, I didn't know. It was, I think it was kind of a learning process of what I wanted to write and what really appealed to me. And I don't really know what genre they would fall in, more like women's fiction, maybe. I don't even remember what they were about.
Which is really just a terrible, I mean, I know why they call it women's fiction, but it's just like, it's because you don't like call like men's fiction or anything. It's
no, it's such an umbrella term. But yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of tension in it. Like, I think I've always really liked the characters. I've always gotten that, and the dialogue I've always been quite good at, but trying to get that tension in there, I just didn't have it. And it just took me some time, and actually reading within this genre, the thriller and suspense genre. And I think that's helped me understand how tension works and how you can, and especially when you have like two protagonists, how that can create tension. Yeah.
So, so after your first novel was published, you continued with two other novels with Gallery Books, at least in the United States.
Yeah.
Were those, the second novel? I mean, because a lot of readers I don't think realize this too. Like, it's not just, okay, the writer sells a book, they publish a book, and then they go and they just write their second book and everything's peachy. Like sometimes, writers will pitch ideas, and I mean, there's a long process where the publisher might, or you might turn it in, the publishers might like, so like, I mean, what, with the second and third book, was there any barriers, any struggles you had when you got to do that?
Not really. So when I was writing the first book and they decided to sign for two books, so I got a 2-book deal. I didn't know what I was going to write for the second book. So after I turned in the first book, my editor and I had a call, and she was like, well, what do you want to write for the second book? And I was like, I have this idea. And I blathered on in a really poor, inefficient way, not doing the elevator pitch that you're supposed to. And I was like, I don't know how to explain it. Sorry. And she was like, well, I trust you. I know you can write it. So that trust was really good. And because I'm not a plotter, it was really hard for me to be able to say what it was about, because I wasn't thinking in terms of the elevator pitch. I hadn't really got to that stage yet. I hadn't learned that. I was more thinking in terms of telling her about the whole story, which I shouldn't have done. So, but when I sat down to write it, I was really confident. I knew what I was going to do. I had the kind of feeling, the aura of the story, and I was able to write the first draft fine, like no bother. I didn't have any of that, like, they say there's that sophomore novel slump. Like, I didn't have that. I just felt confident in writing it. But when edits came, there were so many of them. I was like, this is the worst thing I've ever written. So I was like, on reflection, I probably did have the sophomore slump. I was just like happily going away, like, la, 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 just writing the book. But it's fine. Like, I got through it. Her edits were amazing. She was a brilliant editor. It just took me longer to kind of get those edits implemented than in the first book. But I think in the first book, you've already basically edited it, right? Before you've even sent it out on submission. So it's always a cleaner piece of work. But that second one wasn't clean at all. It had so much editing to do, and like plot holes that needed to be filled. And yeah, I don't know, it was a mess.
Yeah, for people who are interested, I guess oftentimes, first novels are usually very polished because writers are
Yeah.
working on them for several years in
Years.
some cases,
Yeah.
and it goes through then trying to find an agent. The agent's usually trying to polish it as best they can when they shop it out, and then it goes through, and then you get a book deal, and it's like, okay, we need another, we need a new book in 12 months or even
Yeah.
less, and all of a sudden it's like,
Yeah,
well, and then so it's this weird culture shock almost for a lot of writers who aren't used to writing on deadline. Which, I mean, personally, I love deadline. Like, I recently wrote like almost like 100,000 word novel in 2 months, and
oh
I
my
thought it was going to be
goodness.
shitty, but it turned out really well. And I was like, okay, great. But sometimes you just get lucky that way. But
Yeah.
and I always tell writers too, like, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. It's not like every
Yeah,
book's
it
going to
does
be easy,
become easier.
but you just
Yeah.
kind of start feeling, you start feeling more at ease, I guess.
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
backtrack a little bit because we kind of glossed over it. So you grew up in the United States. You
Yeah.
currently live in London. How long were
Yeah.
you living in the United States?
So I lived in America until I was 21. And then I went traveling and ended up in Ireland, as you do. I got off the plane in Heathrow in London, Heathrow Airport, and I was really tired. It was like an overnight flight. And I was really tired, and I was like stumbling along. And the first thing that I came to was an Aer Lingus desk. And Aer Lingus is like the carrier plane for Ireland. And I just randomly, rather than staying in London or going and visiting any of the beautiful things in London, I decided to hop on the next plane to Ireland. So off I went to Ireland and to Dublin, and I ended up taking a tour bus all around the Republic of Ireland. And I had an amazing time. It was so much fun. I made really good friends. And I ended up in Galway, which is on the West Coast. And I found out that in Galway, they have a beautiful university, the National University of Ireland, Galway. And they have a master's in journalism program. So I decided as soon as I got back to America, I was going to apply. And I did, and I got accepted. And away I went, and I moved away. And then while I was there, I met my husband, and we did move back to America for about 2 years, probably 3 years, but we did travel a bit there. And then after that, we just never really settled back in. It was just, when you're looking at something with nostalgia, rose tinted glasses, it just wasn't actually where we wanted to be. So we moved to London. We moved back to London.
And this might come across as very ignorant, so I apologize, but you have a UK accent now, correct?
I don't think so.
Or some type of accent? No?
I don't know. I mean, I can't hear me. I'm just me.
Right. But I guess my question is, how long have you been living in London? Or, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, well, your husband's London.
I'll let you do the math. I moved when I was 21.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm 44 now. So I've
So,
spent all
okay.
my life
I'm just, it's
away.
just,
Yeah.
I'm just always curious, like how long it takes some people to try to, when you're in another country to,
Yeah.
lose an accent, I guess, like an
Yeah.
American, you know what I mean? Or like, or like if someone from the UK comes and lives in America for a long time,
Yeah.
and then you got people like, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who like always has his accent, but sometimes people
Yeah.
lose it. I mean,
I don't know
Madonna,
what it
like
is.
she got her UK accent in like a week.
That's right. That didn't happen to me, I'm sure. But I mean, when I'm here, everybody thinks I sound American, but when I go to America, people think I sound either Irish or British. They don't know. I have like a weird
That's
mesh of an accent.
fascinating. That's
So it
fascinating.
just depends on perspective and what you hear, I suppose, around you all the time.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's jump into the newest book.
Yeah.
The newest book that
Still
just
Black
came out
Waters.
from, hold it up there. These Still Black Waters. Thomas and Mercer just recently published it. It was a Amazon first reads, and my understanding it was also an Amazon charts bestseller.
Yeah, it did
That's
really well.
huge.
I'm really, really happy. Like, um, yeah, people are downloading it, people are reading it. The reviews have been pretty good, um, and I'm just really happy. I'm really proud of this book. So yeah, it's
So
good to see it.
Amazon had this listed as a police procedural, which I, having read it, I can see that, but it's also not your typical police procedural, if that makes sense. Because
Yeah,
usually with
I
police
don't know how that
procedural,
happened.
we have, I don't want to say they're like formulaic, but
Yeah,
honestly, this is a Jess Lambert novel, which, book 2 is going to be a Jess Lambert novel.
yeah.
She's the police detective. She doesn't show up in this book for several
Chapter
chapters,
like
which usually
5.
is a little
Yeah,
bit different. I mean, we
yeah,
start out with a different character for several
yeah.
chapters. It almost seems like, the protagonist, and then it switches. So I mean, I don't know, like, was that the idea from the start? Or I mean, how did you
I
have the
had
idea
no
that
idea it was going to be placed as a police procedural. That had nothing to do with me. 100% publisher, these things that are outside of your control. Like, I had no idea. So after the email was sent out, I saw that it was police procedural, and I was like, it's not really. Like, it's very much suspense. I mean, Jess Lambert is a detective, right? So you could say that it's police procedural, but it's very much the story. Like, she's investigating a story, but also it's about the characters. It's about Neve and what happens to her. So I wouldn't classify it as police procedural. I have a few reviewers who are like, this is not a police procedural. And I'm like, well, I know. So later in the month, my publisher did change it to suspense. So they changed it on the first reads page. And
yeah,
I think, it was an odd classification, but I mean, technically speaking, it could be.
I
But
mean,
I would
all
say that it's suspense. That would have been
right.
my.
Usually, I don't know. And again, that's one of those things for people who are curious, just a marketing thing, usually
Yeah,
how publishers want to market a certain book. But it is a
yeah,
book about a police detective. And again, there's going to be a second
yeah.
book. Did you know when you were starting writing this book that it was going to be the potentially first book of a new series that like you had? I mean, and did you have a second book already in mind, or, like do you have
That's a
other
good
books already
question.
in mind?
When I first sat down to write this book, I wrote it almost primarily from Neve's point of view. Neve is the first protagonist that we see. And I only had Jess as like a kind of secondary. She was a protagonist, but she was in third person, and it was really mostly just so that the reader could see a little bit more of a bird's eye view of what was going on, to add some tension and create more tension basically with Neve. And then when it's sold, my editor was like, what would you think about making this into a series? And I was like, that's an amazing idea, let's do it. So we did that, and I completely changed Jess's I changed her from third person to first person, and I changed her background, and I just really drilled down into who she is as a person, as a character, her kind of history, and what happened with her trauma, and the things that have come up in the story. So I just really brought that all to the forefront, so they're kind of equal protagonists. So the story is happening from Neve's point of view, but Jess is investigating that story. So I mean, in that way, you could see where it would be a police procedural, but it's very much a suspense story. It's suspense.
Right. And so is the second book, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but I know that you've
Yeah.
written the second book by now, I'm
Yeah.
assuming, and and I've turned it into the publisher. Is it the
Yes.
same thing where, we have first person point of view from another character, and then we also
Yeah.
have just, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
is the kind of the same structure because,
Same sort of
um,
structure. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
So I have
So,
in the second book, it starts out for about 5 chapters, really solidifying that case, that story that Jess is going to be confronting. That happens for about 5 chapters, and then Jess jumps in. And then it's that like just that tension between the two protagonists. And in my next book, the other protagonist is actually a teenager. She's 17. So that was quite fun to kind of mine the depths of my teenage soul.
right. So the title, was that a title that you guys had shopped it around at, or is that something that
For the
came
second
after
one, or
the effect? No, for the first one, These Still Black
these two
Waters.
black waters. So it was, no, we went through so many, my agent and I went through a load of different titles. And the title that I had picked, that I had submitted to her with, which I can't say because it kind of gives it all away. She was like, no, this gives everything away. So we can't use this. So we were back and forth brainstorming different things to do with Black Lake and Black Waters, and what else are we doing? Dead, and things like that. Like, I'm trying to think of other titles that we came up with, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but a lot of brainstorming around Black Lake and Black Waters. And I don't actually remember who said These Still Black Waters. I can't remember if it was her or me, or if it was just like moving words around and then we were like, voila, you know? But yeah, it was just like we both saw it and we both really loved it. So we kept that. And when she turned it in to my editor, when it sold, they wanted to keep it. They loved the title and wanted to keep it. So it worked out.
Was this the first time something like that happened, or has it been with the other titles too, where you had submitted it initially under a different title? Because this is always I always find this interesting too, because
Yeah.
sometimes, you know, sometimes from the very beginning you might have a title and it stays that title for the entire way. I
Yeah.
mean, I had mentioned before, When You're Gone, this was not the original title. I had submitted this under Her Dark Secret, which was a
Yeah.
song that that one of the characters has in the book. And when they brought up, and this is such a nerd thing, but when someone has suggested When You're Gone, the first Avery Bishop book was called Girl Gone Mad, and I'm like, well, is it going to be a
Yeah.
problem that like there's two, like the two books have gone in the title?
Yeah.
And they're just like, no one's going to care, no one's even going to
Yeah.
notice.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
So
I,
this
I
one, it just depends on the book, right? Like every book is different. It's its own beast. So every book has been different. The Night Olivia Fell, we went through like a million variations. Behind Every Lie, they kept from the beginning. Do No Harm, kept from the very beginning.
all
These
right,
Still Black
so you're
Waters.
2 for 2 so far. Well, actually, what
Yeah.
about the second book, the
So that
next Jess?
it's called What Lies in Darkness, and it is the title that I named it. So I
Nice.
mean, just sometimes they change it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it fits with the kind of vibe, the genre that they want to put it in. But ultimately, marketing has control of the title. So as an author, I have a massive say over it, of course. But like with The Night Olivia Fell, initially I didn't love that. I felt like it was really long, and I kind of vetoed it. But then we circled back and they were like, okay, we'll move on. But then they circled back and said, we really love this. And then I thought about it more and I was like, well, it literally is about the night Olivia fell. So actually that works.
Yeah. So, and then for the audiobook for this most recent book, you have 3 different narrators, because there are actually, I mean, we don't want to get into too much about the book, but
Yeah.
did you have any, or actually for any of the books, even your first 3, did you ever have any say over any, the narrators? Because I don't know if you're
Yeah.
an audiobook fan, but oftentimes, a narrator can really make or break a book. So I don't know, like, was
Yeah.
there any input you had?
So I always get sent 1 or 2 for each character, 1 or 2 voices for every character. And then I get to choose. So I don't do anything like, I don't audition or do any of that. They just send me their final choices and they're like, we think these are the best 2 for Jess. And then I'll listen and I'll go, yes, I like this one, or no, I don't. And usually they're they're all really quite good. But sometimes I'll be like, I feel like this accent isn't right for this character. That's only happened like one time where I vetoed all of the choices that they gave me, and then they came back with somebody else. So they do give me final say, but ultimately they're doing all of the auditioning and getting those people kind of casted.
How much research do you typically do with your books? Are you someone who like does like a lot of research, or are you someone who's kind of like you try not to let the research get in the way, if that makes sense?
It depends on the book. Do No Harm was very, there was a lot of like medical stuff going on, and a lot of information about, I had to do a lot of research about opioids. And because of that, I did a lot of research, like months and months and months. I interviewed detectives, I interviewed a doctor about the processes that they go through there. So I did a lot of interviews and I did a lot of research. That's probably my most research heavy book. It's like very, very accurate in terms of the opioid epidemic and the processes that went through, that would be gone through for this particular type of cancer that the child has. But in general, I don't do a lot of research. It's mostly like creative. So because I did that research from Do No Harm in interviewing a detective, I have that in my head now. And I'm like, okay, this is how processes work there. And I've carried that on to this book. So this book, I didn't really have to do a lot of research because it's not medically heavy at all. And I already had that information about detectives. So I kind of just wrote, and any questions I had, I thought I'll come back to it later and I'll highlight these things and come back to it. And there was nothing really major. So it just depends on the book.
Right. What are you reading currently, or like watching? Any like good recommendations? Anything you want to
What
tell
am I
people about?
watching? I don't watch a lot of TV actually, but I am watching something called The Manifest. It's on Netflix. Have you seen it? It's
I
basically,
know of it.
yeah, it's really, I'm interested to see where they're going to go with this. Basically, all these people are on this plane and there's this lightning strike and they're shaking around, and then they land and they find out that it's 5.5 years after they took off. So something happened with that lightning strike and you don't really know what. But then when they land, they're all having the same sort of like hearing a voice and having these hallucinations, but they're all having it. So I'm interested to see, it's very outside of what I would normally watch or be interested in, but I'm really interested to see how it goes. It's quite intriguing. Yeah, it's good. What I'm reading, I'll tell you what I'm reading. I've just finished this book. It's called It Takes Monsters by Mandy McHugh. And it's about a woman who hates her husband, like he's just such a jerk. And so she makes this great plan to murder him. And the night comes where she's going to murder him. It's at this big, I think it's a Halloween, or like a costume, like a big fancy dress. You guys call it a costume party. And they're all dressed up and the husband is killed. He's murdered, but not from her. Somebody else did it. So somebody knew about her plans and the detective is now investigating her. And it's just really like sexy and sinister and gritty. It's good. It's really good. I love it. I recommend it.
So over here in the US, we have a thing called BritBox where we're able to like see a lot of
BritBox.
like, yeah, you can
Okay.
subscribe. It's called BritBox. And so my wife and I had subscribed, and we ended up watching like every season of like MI5 and there's a lot of seasons, and just like some British shows. Is there anything like
Okay.
that over in the US or in the UK where there's like, some type of thing you can subscribe to that's just like American TV? If that makes sense. Is
I
that a thing, or
mean, we
like
have
no one really wants
Netflix.
to see American TV?
I don't know. We have Netflix. That's what I have. Netflix and Amazon Prime. But we miss out on a lot of the shows because we don't have things like Hulu, or that I'm aware of. We don't have a lot of the things you guys have. So I'm always kind of seeing shows and I'm like, I've never seen that and I can't find it anywhere.
Hmm.
Like Mayor of Easttown, couldn't find it anywhere. It's now on Amazon Prime. You have to buy it. So it's not like on Netflix streaming or whatever.
Right.
So there's just like there's a very big difference in what we can see compared to what Americans can see. So I always feel like a little bit left out. I'm like, oh, everybody's talking about this show and I can't watch it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I think Mayor of Easttown, I think it was an HBO show. I don't know though if, even if, there's is there HBO in the UK? I was
No,
no,
not that I'm aware of. I
wow.
mean, maybe there is, but
Oh,
I don't
okay.
think so. I think
Yeah, because I guess
shows that
sometimes
are on
there's this.
HBO,
I
they
I
get
guess some.
sold to Amazon Prime or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's, it can be a territory thing too. I don't know. It's just a
Yeah.
weird thing that usually with Netflix, you always assume now, when a show comes out, it's like,
Yeah.
worldwide, and that's not always the
Everywhere.
case. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, it's not the case. Yeah. I mean, like the
um,
really big ones we'll get for sure, but
yeah.
yeah, not everything.
So you already turned in book 2 of the Just Lambert series.
Yeah.
Um, are you working on anything right now? Is there anything you can kind of tell us? I mean, I know like we know we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but I mean, is there anything that people can look forward to in another like 2 years? Or are you staying busy? Are you taking some time off? Do you like to have like, you know, some rest time in between books? Or are you a writer that just really,
Yeah.
can't stay docile
Mhm.
and you just really need to just start working on something new?
Yeah, I'm that writer. I like to have things going all the time, but the thing is, I don't have anything else that's sold yet, so I don't like talking about it until it's sold. Otherwise, I'm like, "Oh, but then maybe I've jinxed it," or not that I've jinxed it, but then, then people will be like, "Where's that book that you were talking about?" And I'm like, "Oh, it didn't sell," and I don't want to have to say that. So right now I'm kind of in between. I literally just turned in edits for the second Jess Lambert book, and we'll see like if it sells really well, then I'll write a third one. I don't have the contract for that yet, so we'll have to see how that goes. And then I'll probably start writing another standalone, a new one, which I don't know what it'll be about, so I can't even tell you.
Do you have like a Word document where you kind of put ideas, or do you kind of just
Yeah.
have ideas that's like, for me at least, sometimes uh I'll have an idea, but I won't write it down because I always feel like if I
Okay.
don't write it down and it stays in my head, like I have
No.
book ideas where like, literally probably over a decade or two,
Yeah.
it stays with me. And so I always feel like, well, if it's been a decade and this idea still stays with me, it's probably an idea worth writing, as opposed to you might
Well,
have an
see,
idea and
that's
then you
the
forget about it
aura.
next
That's
week.
the aura. That's the aura of the
That's the
story. So
aura.
you get
Okay.
it too. When it's like it sticks in your head. Okay, good. You get it too.
Okay. Yeah. So like, is it the same way too? Or obviously sometimes, you have to pitch ideas to your agent or whatever. So things do get
Yeah.
written down, but like, do you ever but some writers I know just, they'll just keep like a little, like on the, like the notes app on their phone. They'll just, they'll see
Yep.
something and just like, jot down an
Yep.
idea
That's
just
what I
throughout the
do.
day. And
Yep.
yeah.
I have the notes app on my phone and I have a billion stories, and some of them are like paragraphs long. Some of them are just a sentence. Some of them are just a character that I have in my head. And I'm like, so I never go back through them ever, like never. So you're exactly the same as you. If a story is really sticking in my head, like I'll still write it down, but it'll stay with me even after I've written lots and lots of other story ideas down, but it sticks with me. And then I know I need to think about the characters and how I could make the structure of this book and maybe write a scene and see if it keeps on calling to me. But yeah, I do keep notes on my phone and I do keep lots of story ideas on there, but mostly coming up with a new story idea is about the idea, but also the timing. Like if I'm in the middle of writing a book, I'll write down all the ideas that I want, but I won't go back and look at it. I won't start it because then I'll get distracted, and you have to really focus to write a book, right? You got to get into it. You got to know those characters. You got to know that atmosphere, that plot, everything. And same as you, I'm not a plotter. I'm a pantser. So it's a heavy cognitive load, right? Like you're really carrying a lot of information in your head. And to start writing another story would detract from that. So I don't allow myself to. So I
Yeah.
keep those notes for sure, but
Yeah. There's
oh,
some writers, I don't know how they do it. They will work on, 2 or more projects simultaneously, which,
yeah,
uh, more power to them. I don't think I could really kind of, at least maintain that for a long time, but, and like, I could just try to do one project at a time,
one at a time.
So, okay, so being a pantser, do you ever find yourself being just surprised, like, oh, this character, you know what I mean? Like where you thought maybe a
Yeah,
character was going to do something or a character was not who they turned out to be.
yeah.
I mean, so like, do you kind of like know what the ending is going to be before you write it? And then are there times where the ending might, you know what I mean? Like you're surprised because like, oh, it's not quite what I thought it was going to be, or like it goes
Yeah.
completely different, like halfway through. I mean, do you ever have that happen to you?
I never know exactly what's going to happen. And again, every book is totally different. So I knew basically what was going to happen at the end of Do No Harm. That was a little bit plotted in a way. It wasn't plotted, but I kind of had an idea where I was going to go with it. Whereas with The Night Olivia Fell, I had no idea. And I just got really wrapped up into those final scenes. I was so wrapped up in it. It made me really emotional writing those scenes. And it was a surprise to me. The bad guy girl, baddie, was a complete surprise to me too, because I thought it was going to be somebody else. But then when I got there, I was like, no, it has to be this other person. So I think it depends on the book. Generally, I don't know the ending. I just let the characters kind of speak to me, and as I get to know them in the book, as I'm writing those first chapters, those first pages, then I can kind of go, well, this is the direction they're going to go. And then sometimes I find that out at the end. So I'm often surprised. In fact, most of the time I'm surprised. And I think that's nice. I think that speaks to my creativity, and I think that it's more fun that way for me. And everybody's different.
That's great. So all right, so the book is These Still Black Waters. The author is Christina McDonald. The book is everywhere right now on Amazon Publish, or it is out from Amazon Publishing from Thomas and Mercer imprint. The book was a Amazon first read, so if you were lucky to download it free last month, congratulations. If not, it's available on Amazon, so go pick it
Yeah.
up. Read it, review it, because reviews are very helpful. I know it's one of
These
those
are
things that writers always
powerful.
ask people, and unfortunately, we are a slave to the algorithm.
Yeah.
That's how books are sold nowadays. So
Yeah.
if you really like a book, please spend a minute, just writing some nice things, and like leave a review. It's very,
Yeah.
very helpful. So, is
Yes.
there anything
We
else
love
you
it.
want to add, Christina?
Well, why don't you tell me about your book? I haven't had a chance to read it yet, and I'm really looking forward to it. The Killing Room, the new one?
Yes, I don't even have any copies currently available. That one, like you, I had initially written as a standalone, basically about it
Okay.
starts out a businessman. He wakes up in Vegas in a motel room
Yeah.
that's not his, finds a dead woman in the bathtub, and that's kind of like the first chapter or two. But then the book goes in a completely different direction. But I initially, it was like I kind of was like, it's gonna be a standalone. And then at a certain point, I
Yeah.
realized, okay, this is going to go into a book two, and you know what I mean. And so
Yeah.
that's always fun,
Yeah.
doing that. But also, I write, I write under my name, and also, I do Avery Bishop. So like, also, I kind of juggle two different genres,
Yeah.
which you also
I
had
love how
that
you did that.
conversation. Well, you have conversation with some people because, and I remember, I think I was at Thriller Fest, and one person was like, "Well, wait, why are you writing under two different names?" And I'm like, his one's thrillers and one's suspense. And
Yeah.
they're like, wasn't it the same thing? And I'm like, yeah,
Just
basically. It's just,
tie-in,
it's
but
more of like,
yeah.
and again, it goes back to that whole like marketing thing. It's just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
publishers are
Exactly.
going to market it. I mean, so it is very kind of annoying. I mean, I really, I envy some of those writers who can just publish anything under their own name,
Yeah. I don't know
whether
how
it's,
they do that. I'd like
yeah,
to be able to do that. I can't even
yeah.
write in a different genre. Right now, I'm just like only suspense. Maybe when I grow up, I can write
Well,
romance or something.
I will say this because kind of I started out, in high school being a huge like, Michael Crichton, Stephen King fan. So like I wanted to be like a horror writer. So a lot of my earlier stuff was supernatural, more horror. And then I kind of just naturally just kind of, I guess my stuff is always more thriller-esque. So that's
Mm,
what I just kind of started doing. And then I had the idea for Girl Gone Mad, but I never really wrote suspense. Like I had read it. I don't think
yeah.
I really understood it. And I remember my editor at Lake Union, she had said something which really was great. And I think I wrote it down, but it was basically like suspense is the threat of violence, whereas thrillers is more of the actual violence on the page.
Hmm.
And so it was like kind of a learning curve. I feel like I've gotten better at it, but I mean, with the first Avery Bishop book, and even with When You're Gone, like there were some heavy rewrites being done, which I like doing. I really like revising, having, just making it as good as it can be, like, I mean, but
Yeah.
there were things where, like, and with like When You're Gone, see, some scenes were just taken out. Actually, my very first draft at the very end, because there was this climactic scene, I knew as I was writing it, this is not going to stay in here,
Yeah.
but I still just wanted to write
You
it
did it
just to
anyway.
like finish it. But like
Yeah.
immediately as I was writing it, I was like, this is not, like, there's no way I can keep this in this book, because it became less suspense and more, that thriller type of stuff. So it's always just trying to find that like balancing act.
Yeah.
Kind of like, turning off those like two sides of the brain, or like,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. But I don't know. It's fun writing in different genres. I mean, but it's
Yeah.
also, again, it becomes those things where like I have other ideas I'd love to do, but it's like I don't think it's not in, me book. It's not an Avery Bishop book. So like, am I going to do
Yeah.
like a second pen? It's like
Yeah. I think
that's even
about
going to
that
be a
too.
pain in the
Like,
butt.
I have this idea, but I don't know. And yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, eventually, when you have a worldwide bestseller, then you can just do whatever you want. I mean, you have people like Colson Whitehead who, as long as you win
Yeah.
some Pulitzer Prizes, you can then write some crime novels. And
Yeah.
people are going to be like, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah. I know.
So, but yeah,
I want to be that.
let's talk more about me. No, I was joking, but so again, thank you, Christina, for hanging out. Everyone, check out her books again on Amazon all over the world. I mean, right now it's only English. I mean, the book is in English, but it's
Yeah.
available on like all Amazon, I would assume.
Everywhere. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so everywhere. And then hopefully, yeah, there will be some also some foreign editions coming out at some point. Hopefully, fingers
Yeah.
crossed. They will be working
Hopefully.
on
Yeah.
that. So anyway, so thank you again, Christina, for hanging out. Everyone go check her
Thank
out
you
at
for having
Christina
me.
McDonald. Yes, go Christina-McDonald.com. That is
Christina.
where
Oh,
you'll,
yeah. My website. Yeah. Christina-McDonald.com.
and on
And you
social
can
media, what's the best place to find you?
probably Instagram, Christina Mac 79, but also on Facebook, it's Christina McDonald author.
Okay, perfect. There you go,
Yeah.
folks.
Come and find me.
So thank you again, Christina, and everybody go check out Christina's books, and we will see you next time. Bye.